Hello everyone, my name is Richa Mahajan, Assistant Professor, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Jagan Nath University, Jaipur. Hello, today I am going to talk about what is composition. Put simply, composition is how the elements of a photo are arranged. A composition can made up of many different elements or, or only a few. It's how the artist put those things within a frame that help a photograph become more or less interesting to the viewer. A photograph will take many different parts and combine them into an aesthetically pleasing whole. Composition is how an artist tells a story within the confines of a single frame. Next is, why is composition is important in photography? How many times have you seen a photograph that seemed to be taken in an amazing location with an incredible subject, but the image did not do much for you? The problem very well might be that the composition was off. Composition is everything when it comes to a photograph. Oftentimes, the technical side of an image is pretty easy to learn, so the one thing that separates a great image from one that is less interesting is the composition. Everyone has a camera these days, so how you are able to visually capture something that is also being photographed by the masses right alongside you will help to distinguish your work other from other photographers. Hopefully this will gain you the success or business you seek. Next is composition concepts and principles. I would be willing to bet that a large majority of digital photographers do not know these, and yet each of these principles and elements can be something to look for, which will help you to find something interesting to photograph. I will address a few of these in more depth below. In addition to being something that can be the primary compositional element of a photograph, each of these can combined with other compositional element to make for more aesthetically pleasing images. Next is elements of composition. First is lines. When it comes to bringing attention to specific parts of a frame, lines are one of the best ways to do so. What better way than a nice strong line pointing right at the subject to catch the viewer's eye? Leading lines. Next is leading lines. Leading lines are just that, lines that point you into the frames towards the subject. In addition to lines that leads into a composition, you can have multiple lines that converge into the frame or towards the subject. When it comes to my lines, I try whenever possible to bring them in from the corners. The corners are neutral, and these leading lines do not cut part of the frame the way a hard lines from an edge will. Rivers and streams are great ways to incorporate leading lines, movements, and color into an image. Converging lines can be the edges from numerous buildings or trees, or any group of edges pointing towards the middle of the frame from all sides. Next is shape and form. Shape and form are similar elements of design. The main difference being that things with form are three-dimensionals: heavy weight, width, and depth. Photography is a 3D representation of a scene, so whereas a painting might have more shapes in it, a photograph typically has more forms. The more the more interesting the form, the more interesting the image. Forms can be geometric, like a building, or organic, like a walrus or a person. Next is space. The way you put forms and shapes together occupies space within a frame. The arrangements is the composition and also leaves empty or negative space around and between other forms. This negative space can become an interesting compositional element as well. When you are looking for a shot, especially in urban areas or with portrait work, not only are the forms within the frame important, but the space that is not occupied by these forms can be just as poignant. Keep in the mind that when using silhouettes, these forms can look more like shapes, and playing with them to make things look two dimensionals can also be a powerful tool in photography composition. Next is color. Part of learning about photography is studying color. Color is comprised of three parts: hue, value, and intensity. Those who use Adobe products will no doubt recognize the hue is simply the name of the color, for example, red, blue, and green, etc. The intensity refers to saturation, how bright and pure the color is, while the value refers to luminosity, how bright or dark the color is. There are some basic color schemes that work well together. They are practiced daily by artists, graphic designers, and other photographers. These simple color theories can really help when you are looking for composition that will work. Remember to look at a color wheel from time to time. Study the different color theories, complementary colors, analogous colors, even primary, secondary, and tertiary color schemes are, as well as monochromatic colors other than black and white. Next is texture. Texture refers to the tactile element of something. In the case of photograph, there is not any one tactile feeling. All photos feel the same. As such, the texture refers to the look of how something is perceived to feel in reality. If you are taking a photo of a cactus, there is a texture that gives the viewer an idea of what that cactus feels like. Compositionally, making texture a big part of a frame can really give the viewer a sense of a place. Going on next. Next is principles of composition. That is rhythm. Rhythm creates movement by repeating patterns and shapes throughout the frame of an image in random and highly organized arrangements. Yes. Next is balance. I always refer to balance as a teeter-totter. If you split your composition into halves, top and bottom, or left and right, does it feel like they belong together? Does one side feel like it has too much going on? This does not mean that both sides have to be symmetrical, but if you have an object on one side that attracts the viewer's eye, the other side should have something to keep you interested in the whole image as opposed to just the dominant or larger object. Now look at the photo. You will understand what I am talking about. Next is unbalanced images can hold the viewer's eye on one side of the frame instead of allowing it to take in and flow through the whole composition. Next is proportion. Proportion refers to the size of objects within a frame as they relate to one another. It can be utilized within a successful composition by exaggerating proportions in one way or another by changing the camera angle. The photographer can also position the subject in such a way to make differences in proportion the focus of the image. Emphasis. Emphasis is one of the most important element of composition. Emphasis refers to how the elements of your composition guide the viewer to an intentional subject within the frame. To do this, the photographer can employ a variety of techniques. Playing with selective lighting helps to emphasize the subject being lit. Other ways to emphasize a subject all include leading lines and proportions. Even the way that the photographer dresses or groups subject can place emphasis within a frame. Next is harmony. Now let's take a look What is harmony? Harmony uses color, texture, line, and other aspects of art to point out the similarities of subjects within an image. Harmonious images will often showcase how different objects are all the same and utilize something that all the objects have in common to do so. Next is variety. Variety is the opposite of harmony. Not to say that it is chaos, but variety juxtaposes different objects together so that their differences are what brings interest to the photograph and the story being told. Next one is movement. Movement within a composition is a photographer's ability to imply motion. Obviously, nothing within a still image is actually moving, but by the use of creative shutter speed, panning, or zooming with the camera, you can create an implied feeling of motion. Yes, coming on next is ISO. What is ISO? In very basic term, ISO is simply a camera setting that will brighter or darker a photo. As you increase your ISO number, your photos will grow progressively brighter. For that reason, ISO can help you capture images in darker environments too, or be more flexible about your aperture and shutter speed settings. However, raising your ISO has consequences. A photo taken at too high of an ISO will show a lot of grains, also known as noise, and might not be usable. So brightening a photo via ISO is always a trade-off. You should only raise your ISO when you are unable to brighten the photo via shutter speed or aperture instead. For example, if using a longer shutter speed would cause your subject to be blurry. Next is, what is the meaning of ISO? The acronym ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization. However, camera ISO does not directly refer to the organization that creates various technology and product standards. Even since two film standards called ASA and DIN were combined into ISO standards in 1974, later revised for both film and digital photography. They were referred to as one word ISO from that point on, although ISO initially defined only on film sensitivity. It was later adopted by digital camera manufacturers with the purpose of maintaining similar brightness level as film. Common ISO values. Every camera has a different range of ISO values, sometimes called ISO speeds, that you can use. A common set is as follows: ISO 100, low ISO, ISO 200, ISO 400, ISO 800, ISO 1600, ISO 3200, ISO 6400. High ISO is ISO 6400. Quite simply, when you double your ISO speed, you are doubling the brightness of the photo. So a photo at ISO 400 will be twice brighter than ISO 200, which will be twice brighter than ISO 100. Next is, what is base ISO? The lowest native ISO on your camera is your base ISO. This is a very important setting because it gives you the potential to produce the highest image quality, minimizing the visibility of noise as much as possible. Some older DSLRs and a number of modern cameras such as Fuji X-T2 have the base ISO of 200, whereas most modern digital cameras have a base ISO of 100. Optimally, you should always try to stick to the base ISO to get the highest image quality. However, it is not always possible to do so, especially when working in low light conditions. Low versus high ISO noise visibility. To give an example of two photos taken in different ISO value, take a look at the comparison below. Pay attention to the level of noise, graininess, and blotchy colors in the images. Even in dim or dark environment, you still might be able to use a low ISO For example, if you have a camera mounted on a tripod or sitting completely still on a table, in that case you can safely use a low ISO and brighten your photo via a long shutter speed instead. Since you won't introduce camera shake, however, keep in mind that if your camera does use a long shutter speed, anything that is moving will look like a ghost. When to use high ISO, even though it is ideal to use low ISO, there will be a plenty of times when high ISO is necessary in order to take a good photo in the first place. The simple reason that is that you are often fighting against motion blur and you will need to pick between a sharp photo at a high ISO or a blurry photo at low ISO. Take a look at the image below. Thank you so much.
Thank you.